Hello, my name is Samantha Squires, and this is my considerations for ELL evaluation presentation. All right. So first off, I wanted to start with differences in dialect and kind of what that was. This could be a difference in the phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. So this is something that can be really difficult for a teacher to understand if a student is using the word incorrectly or if they're using it in a different dialect. The most common differences in dialect is Black English. This is completely different from mainstream English. They pronounce things a little different. They soften the R. They weaken the final consonants. So this is something that a lot of teachers should kind of be aware of. And this typically is their pronunciation is a lot different. They still know a lot of the same words, but it's going to be how they pronounce those words. And it could also be their understanding of it as well. When I was reading the chapter, it was, I kind of took it as it's different than kind of like the slang students will use today, because even if they use slang, they still know what a word in a direction might be or a word on a test might be. But this way, if a student has Black English, they might not understand a certain word because they pronounce it completely different. So that was a difference in dialect that I thought was really important and that teachers should really keep an eye out for. So how differences in dialect might impact assessment? They can definitely impact the understanding. I think as a future educator, this is something that has to be taken very seriously, because I might be giving a test and my student might be doing bad on the test and I might not understand why. But they also might not be understanding my directions. They might not be understanding the vocabulary I use, and they could even not understand the questions that I am asking. So this is something that teachers should be on the lookout for when giving assessments. Again, comprehension. Are they understanding what task is being asked of them? If, they're supposed to read a passage and then answer questions that go with that passage, they might not understand that. And this can go for not just students with Black English, but this can go for students, with any different dialect. This can go for my English as a second language kids. This can go for, I currently have a student from Estonia who English is her second language. So when giving her a test, I kind of do it more of an informal way, and I'll get into those a little bit later. But it's really important that the teachers know if their students are understanding what they're being asked of. How the test is given to them as well. So this could impact if a student is able to test on their own, or if they need a paraprofessional to help them, if they need a teacher to read it to them, if they need to just do a verbal answering, that kind of thing. That can also impact how they test. Vocabulary as well, what words are in their vocabulary and what words might not be. Again, for students that have English as a second language, they might have a total different vocabulary when it comes to some different terminology. So it's important that when testing those students, if it's a verbal test, like if I am reading a test to a student as a paraprofessional and they say, what does this word mean? And I know that they are one of my ELL students, or I know if they're one of, my students that struggle with that understanding, that I'll make sure that that word is explained. Interventions for English learners. A lot of this is testing as well, informal procedures. So when I talk about doing tests kind of verbally with my student from Estonia, I sit down with her and I will say, a good example is we tested over locations on a map. The directions, they were not lengthy. They just said, please, write the letter of the country next, They were a little difficult to understand if English wasn't your first language. So what I did for that was I had the piece of paper in front of me and I said, can you show me where this country is located? and she was able to point out where that country was and where, it was on the map, or where this ocean was. So that's a little bit more informal. Also, checking for understanding goes under that informal procedure. Just making sure, like, after directions are given, going over, re-explaining things in a different way, and just saying, can you tell me what your expectations are for today? Or can you tell me what you are supposed to be accomplishing today? Sentence repetition. I've noticed that sometimes giving students directions more than once helps them. So if I'm saying to a student that's an ELL student that, I need you to write about your weekend in your notebook, and then going and saying, okay, so today you're going to write about your weekend in your notebook. And then coming up and saying, are you writing about your weekend in your notebook? So that's something that's also really important, is to just keep on repeating those sentences and adding in that different vocabulary they might not understand. And after they hear it and they understand what it is, that will really help them. Small group testing, always. This could be, one-on-one with a para. This could be done with, a small group with a teacher. This can be done if they're in a resource classroom, but small group testing is definitely going to make them feel more comfortable to ask those questions like, I don't understand what this word means, or can you explain that, or what does this mean? So small group testing is extremely important. Dynamic assessment is like changing the way you're doing your testing. So this could be doing a test for the first unit, moving on, doing maybe like a 10-question quiz for the next one, and then doing a project for another one. So this is changing up those different assessments to where it's not just all testing. And this is really beneficial for all students, but it can also be beneficial for the English learners because they are getting different directions and they're learning, okay, so a quiz means a small test. A test means over a whole unit. A project means I get to be creative. So they're also learning that different dialect. And then task familiarity, just making sure that when asking them to do something, they know what to do. So they don't walk in the first day of school and you're saying, read this long page, answer these 5 questions. It's, can you read this short paragraph for me and tell me what it's saying? So just things that are familiar to them, things that they would understand. This could also be like letting them choose their own book to read and asking, okay, so you just read this first chapter. What is the chapter? Like, what is the chapter about? What's the main idea? So that can also be really important and really helpful. So teacher influence, I wanted to add this because I personally think it is very important as an educator that we are, not that we're not biased, but that we are accepting of all students. So teacher behavior, are teachers making appropriate gestures, eye contact, talking about things that are important, giving an overview of the lesson or an overview of what we might be reading that day. So teacher behavior is super important. And I think that when some teachers go into a situation where there is a kid that needs an accommodation or there's an English language learner, that they can sometimes be frustrated, and students catch on to that very easily. So having, the correct gestures, eye contact, even tone of voice can be so important when dealing with those students. And not just going up and saying, do you know what you're doing today? But more like, do you understand what the lesson is? Do you need me to repeat anything? Can I explain this in a different way? Just being very helpful to those students and letting them know that you care. Why to not use an interpreter? Like, what's the harm in it? On-the-spot translation can be very difficult. Again, I work with a student from Estonia every day in social studies. She does not have an interpreter. She goes to see the ELL teacher once a week or once a day, but she doesn't have an interpreter with her because, again, on the spot translating can be very difficult and a lot of stuff can get lost in the translation. Something can lose their meaning. I might be asking, can you summarize what this paragraph was meaning, and it might not get translated into that appropriately. Teachers also need to take into consideration language loss. So when a student learns and is in the process of learning a new language, they can lose their first language and have language loss. So they might, lose what the understanding is of something in their first language. And that can be difficult, especially if at home they are just speaking their first language. So teachers really need to take that into consideration, because that can be really important. And that can also, the teacher can also probably see the struggle the student's going through with, I'm losing some of my first language to learn this new language. Lastly, in the special education setting, language proficiency is really important, so that they know the language. When they first get tested, they get tested to see what they know in each language. And a lot of students can be placed in the special education setting because they're over-identified, and people view them as they don't understand what's being asked of them. It's not a won't do, it's a can't do. But that's not the thing either. It's an I don't understand. So a lot of ELL students can be put in special education when they really don't need to. They just need extra support in the classroom. And a lot of times it's because they're not assessed in their own language, and they're not given the chance to show what they know and show, like, hey, I'm really good at math and science and all of these subjects, but you're giving it to me in a language that I'm not familiar with or I'm still struggling in. So as an educator, it's really important that we take those into consideration when testing students for special education that might be an ELL student as well. Again, my student from Estonia is not a special education student. She is very, very smart. She tries her best, and it's been very interesting to see her grow throughout this last year of, not knowing a whole lot. And social studies is hard. Social studies is a lot of language and a lot of reading, and she's done a really good job of asking for help, learning the different definitions, and just becoming a better, well-rounded ELL student. Again, that was my consideration for ELL evaluation. Thank you so much.